Welcome back to the Health Longevity Secrets Show with your host, Dr. Robert Lufkin. His new book titled Lies I Taught in Medical School is now a New York Times bestseller. See the show notes for a link to download a free chapter. And now, please enjoy this week's episode as we look at the differences between biological and chronological age with Chris Mirabile.
This episode is sponsored by Cyfox Health. One of the most common questions I get asked is which blood tests I check myself on a regular basis. Well, I check 17 biomarkers, but the secret is I'm able to do everything from the convenience of my home. I collect the sample with just a simple finger stick like this. You don't need to be a doctor to do it. Then I just mail it in and wait for the results. Cyfox Health makes it possible. Use the link below to get 15% off. This episode is brought to you by L-Nutra, maker of the Prolong fasting mimicking diet. If you'd like to try it, use the link in the show notes for 20% off. And now, please enjoy this week's episode. Hey, Chris, welcome to the program.
Hey, Rob, thank you.
I'm so excited to get into this today. Some fascinating topics. So let's dive right in. So what we hear a lot about chronological age and biological age. So what's the difference? So what are those two things?
Yeah, sure. So chronological age, that's the easiest. Everyone knows it. That's how old we are when we think of our age, right? How many years we've been alive. But biological age is essentially how old we are biologically, which means things like our morbidity risk, so our risk of a chronic illness of aging, our mortality risk, the chances that we're going to pass away at any given point in time, as well as our quality of life metrics. So this is how old we are on a biological cellular level. And this is ultimately what's most important to us, right? We all know some people who are old for their age, so to speak, like say, 50-year-old who looks like they're 60 or 65 and they function that way. And then we also know that 50-year-old who looks and acts young for their age. They're like on the dance floor, you would guess that they were in their late 30s and they're actually 50, right? So I think most of us, if not all of us, want to be that person on the dance floor, depending on how well you dance. But we all want to have that energy and that vigor and that health. And so that's the way it manifests in the real world, is people who kind of seem to be older and seem to be younger. There is some truth to that, and researchers are now using advanced tools to be able to measure how old it literally is, or how old an individual literally is.
So, okay, so we've got biological age and chronological age. And if I want to test for my chronological age, it's easy. I just pull out my driver's license and look at my birth date. So that is the number of years we've all been on the planet or something. Okay, so now what you're saying is that there are tests available for biological age to measure that. Tell us about that. What's going on there?
Sure. So there are multiple different tests out there. Not all of them are created equal, but the most effective and most researched forms of biological age tests are those that are known as epigenetic tests. So they're looking at something called your epigenome, which sits kind of like a layer on top of your genes, right? So we all have our genes, we are familiar with our DNA, but your epigenome is which genes are turned on and off. And as we age, certain genes turn on that maybe shouldn't be, and others turn off that shouldn't actually be off. And there are patterns that emerge from this. And so researchers are able to take this large amount of data, and then they're able to correlate it with biological age. So again, like the risk of having a chronic disease of aging, like Alzheimer's or cancer or heart disease and so on, the risk of mortality. And in some clocks, known as the third generation clocks, which we can talk about the generations if you'd like. The third generation clocks actually even look at quality of life metrics. So, your gait speed and your sit stand test, and if you need assistance to stand up from the floor and so on. All of these things go into that algorithm. So that's on the blood level. Those are the most advanced clocks out there. And again, third generation clocks are going to be the most accurate and precise. There are many other clocks out there that are using first generation or second generation clocks, which are not as ideal. But then you can go even beyond that. And we at Novos, we haven't announced this formally yet, and we haven't launched it yet, but we're looking at probably early April. We're going to be coming out with a biological age test that's 100% free for the general public based on survey data. Now, this is based off of a scientific study that was overseen by world-renowned researchers like Dr. Matt Kaberlein. And this is just based on survey questions and answers. It uses the UK Biobank and the NHANES data sets. So these are very large data sets of people. And based on that, it was trained off of their epigenomes, but now we can actually get quite accurate with just questionnaires. Not as accurate as a third generation blood test that I referred to earlier, but more accurate than the first generation tests like the Horvath test. And so as part of our commitment to bring longevity to as many people as possible, make it as accessible and achievable for everyone, we want to bring this test to people for free. And then, of course, if people want to get even more accurate and precise, they can then progress on to a blood test.
Wow, that's really exciting. Well, let me back up a little bit. You talked about biological age and then about epigenome measurements. And just to be clear, this genetic measurement is different than let's say genotyping with 23andMe or Ancestry.com, yes, or even gene sequencing. So we're not looking at the actual genes, but as you said, I think the epigenome. So it's a different type of way of looking at it. And maybe you could expand upon that a little bit. And like you said, tell us the difference between the first, second, and third generation, because it's a fascinating story of how they kind of were discovered and then evolved.
Sure. Yes. So to your point about the genome versus the epigenome, an analogy I like to give is that a genome is like a piano. It's the actual keys. And then the epigenome is like the piano player who's playing the music. And as you age, certain keys might be misplaced. The rhythm might be off a little bit. So that's, even though the genes are still the same, the piano is still the same. The way that someone's playing it is kind of off as you're starting to age. And that would be the analogy for the epigenome. So the first generation test through the third generation test. The first generation test came out just over a decade ago. The main researcher behind it, the name everyone's familiar with in the industry, is Steve Horvath. And originally, these clocks were trained based on chronological age. So they were trying to predict how old you were chronologically based on your epigenetic data. And they got pretty accurate with this. But as they were building it, they then, after they published that, they realized that what's actually more important is not to predict how old you are chronologically, but seeing the differences across people and different health statuses at any given age. They realized it was more important to try to figure out how old someone is biologically. Once again, the risk factor for disease and mortality. And so they then started to train it against morbidity and mortality. And that's where second generation clocks come in. For example, the PhenoAge clock is a second generation clock. The GrimAge clock, which is GrimAge is literally looking at like likelihood of passing away. That is a second generation clock. The third generation clocks, the ones that we're most excited about at Novos and we offer directly to consumers, there's one specifically created out of Columbia and Duke University called the Dunedin Pace Clock. And this is a really novel clock because it's a longitudinal analysis. In other words, it looked at the same people over a lifetime and saw how their aging progressed over that lifetime. And they then were able to encode that, integrate those results into the algorithm that they built. So they could see how different people were aging at different rates while also looking at this epigenetic data. And so they trained this clock based on that, along with the lifestyle, the quality of life metrics that I mentioned earlier, things like gait speed and sit-stand test and grip strength and so on. And they built all of that into this algorithm. So what's a little bit different about this third generation clock versus the others is it doesn't give you specifically a biological age. It gives you a biological pace of aging. And we think that this is particularly important because that tells you what you are doing right now in your lifestyle. Is it accelerating your aging? In other words, are you aging faster than the average person? Or is it decelerating your aging and you're aging slower than the average person? For example, I'm aging at 0.69 right now, which means I'm aging 31% slower than the average 40-year-old. We have customers who are achieving fantastic results following the guidance and the supplementation that we provide at Novos, slowing down their biological age, which I'm happy to talk about. But we look at this as like the trajectory you're on. From this point forward, if you continue your lifestyle, this is what you can expect. And that number is correlated, again, with disease likelihood and mortality likelihood. So the lower you are, the lower the risk of morbidity, mortality, and that your quality of life is going to decline in the years ahead.
Okay, yeah. So a first generation clock is basically, it's a chronological age clock. It's maybe good for forensics or something, but it's like your birth certificate. The second generation clocks are really exciting because they get at your biological age, your risk of dying, your risk of these chronic diseases. And then, but if you wanted to see your rate of change with a second generation clock, you'd have to get two of them and then look at the difference. And what you're saying, the third generation clocks will do that with one measurement. Essentially, it's a first derivative of the
Yes.
Yes,
That's a great way to put it.
And you can get it with one clock like that. So, well, then the obvious question: what will fourth generation clocks be?
That is a great question. Yeah, I don't
What's
know
coming
off the
down
top
the
of my head.
pipeline?
Yeah.
I guess we'll see. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I know there are multiple different areas that researchers are looking into beyond just the epigenome, right? There's what's called the multiome, and within the multiome, you've got as you know, your genome and your epigenome, like we talked about, but then you also have your transcriptome, your proteome, your metabolome, and then get into the gut microbiota as well. And all of these are being researched for predicting how old we are. Even the lipidome, for example, our head of R&D just co-published a paper. It's in review right now, looking at the lipidome and building a clock based on that, right? So there's all of these different ohms that we can leverage to try to kind of triangulate on figuring out exactly like what different health risks are, and propensities for diseases, and essentially how old we are biologically.
Yeah, it's a great point. Like the glycosylation clocks, the glycanage clocks, looking at that, or you can, I guess, take any biological parameter that reliably changes with age and then put an age to it. In other words, someone was doing coronary calcium scores, which increase statistically over age. And then based on your coronary calcium score, you can create your age, how you relate to the average population calcification, what age that is or something. So yeah, so all sorts of different things. But the nice thing about your DNA methylation, epigenetic methylation clocks is they're sort of holistic, and they give this whole integrated pattern with it. I guess then the $64,000 question is, okay, we got our chronological age, we got our biological age. What can we do to change our biological age? Are there things that will improve it? Because if I'm at a certain age, I'd like to get my biological age younger. I can't change my chronological age, but is it possible to change your biological age?
Yes, it is definitely possible to change your biological age. So I have a personal blog called Slow My Age, where I document all of my personal results, and I look at many different epigenetic clock outcomes, right? So I've run more than a dozen different epigenetic clocks on my methylation data. I've looked at metabolomic clocks. I've looked at telomere length. I've looked at physiological markers like VO2 max and so on. And all of these are basically pointing at me being in my mid to late 20s, biologically speaking, even though I am soon to be 40 in a couple of months. And so that doesn't mean that I literally think of myself as being in my late 20s, but back to the earlier points, like my morbidity risk, my ability to perform athletically, cellularly, and so on, seems to be that of an average person in their mid 20s, which I'll take it. So I'm not the only one. We have many customers of ours who are globally ranked for their ability to slow down their pace of aging, essentially. There's something called the Rejuvenation Olympics that I believe more than 4,000 people at this point have submitted to. And we have the #2 ranked person in the world. Her name is Julie Gibson Clark. She's been covered by Business Insider, Fortune Magazine, and so on. We have Amy Hardison, who I believe is ranked #5. We have Rick Chiovarelli, who's ranked #7 or 8. We have someone named Lil Esky, who's also on that board. So we've got 4 people on this Rejuvenation Olympics in the top 10 for their leaderboards. And we're the only company that is an over-the-counter, simple, inexpensive, relatively speaking, like accessible solution out there. The only other companies that are up on that leadership board next to us are longevity clinics, for example, right? Where it costs a lot of money. You have to visit the doctor, and they're going to give you a very custom prescriptive approach to your longevity. And so what are the things that I'm doing that our customers are doing?
Quick question, if I could interrupt you, excuse me, about the Rejuvenation Olympics. So is that the total number of years you decrease your biological age, or is it just your biological age relative to your chronological age?
So it's 2 leaderboards. One of them is based on your biological pace of aging, and it's the absolute lowest biological pace of aging. And it's corrected by chronological age, meaning that the older you get, the harder it is to have a lower biological pace of aging. And so they used statistical methods to determine who has the best results. In other words, if I have 0.69, which I do at 40, and then somebody else has that score at 70, they're actually performing better than I am, because it's harder for them to achieve that at 70 than it is for me at 40. So they correct for that, and that's one of the leaderboards. The other leaderboard is relative change or improvement in biological pace of aging. And we have multiple customers on both of these leaderboards in the top 10 slots. And so that would be someone who goes, for example, from 0.8 to 0.65. That is their improvement in biological pace of aging.
And so, that's pace of aging. And just to highlight one thing, the Peter Diamandis has been on this program, and he's famously developed a number of X prizes for different things. But one of his latest X prizes is the Longevity X Prize, and they're going to look at biological clocks in 3 areas, I think. But they were going to look at the absolute reduction in that rather than the pace, which is a little different. I like the pace of the aging on the Rejuvenation Olympics. Now, you mentioned that you had that Novos had high ranking people in this Olympics, and to be clear, these are people who are not necessarily using the Novos test for their biological age, but they're actually using Novos products to reverse their age, right? Or to lower their pace of aging? Is that
Yes.
right?
So
How do they do that? Yeah.
Sure. So you mentioned Peter Diamandis. I do want to just quickly mention that Peter Diamandis is also on the Rejuvenation Olympics leaderboard. And so he's really into longevity as well. But I would also like to add that our customers have outranked him. So there's something special that our customers are doing. And just wanted to mention that. And I'm sorry, your question was?
Oh, the question was, what can people do to
Oh, you
lower
asked
their
if
pace
they
of
were using
aging,
our product.
and then specifically your product as well?
Right. So yeah, so for the customers who are on the Rejuvenation Olympics now, I believe all of them actually, they weren't using our test kit. They were working with a third-party lab to get their epigenetic test results, but they were using our supplements. We have other customers who are not yet on that list that should be. So they haven't updated the list yet, but between us, unless other people are entering the list and knocking them out, we have some customers who have fantastic results that should also be added to that top 10. So the customers I've mentioned, there's actually many more that we expect are going to be added. And for those additional ones, many of them did purchase our test kit. But what I will say about that is that we are not administering those kits. So we work with a third-party lab. That lab directly ships it to the customer, and then the customer ships it right back to that third-party lab. So we have we don't touch that product whatsoever. What we do touch is the formulations that we sell. So we have Novos Core, Novos Boost, and we just launched Novos Vital last week. The results that these customers of ours are achieving is not inclusive of Novos Vital yet. It was because Novos Vital is brand new. It was Novos Core and sometimes Novos Core Plus Boost that people were taking to achieve these results.
And is this something they can achieve with supplements alone, or are these people doing lifestyle as well? Or if you take supplements, you don't need lifestyle, or vice versa, or how does that work?
The way
lifestyle
I think
improves biological age also, right? Yeah.
lifestyle 100% does. And we as a company, we don't claim that we have a magic pill that's going to solve all ills, right? Like, so there's a lot of different aspects. If you think of it as a pie, there's different slices. And the slices I tend to think of, just off the top of my head, I might be missing one or two, but it's activity, diet, sleep and recovery, stress management, relationships, your environment. That includes the air quality and how close you are to like green areas or blue areas, being the ocean, nature essentially, and then supplements and or prescription drugs. Prescriptions can, in more cases than not, probably hinder your progress, but in some cases, there are specific prescription drugs that are shown to potentially extend longevity for humans. So those are the slices. So to your question, I would say, is taking the supplements better than doing nothing at all? Yes. Just like exercising is better than not exercising, even if you're eating an unhealthy diet. The best thing is to incorporate healthy lifestyle practices in all of these different slices of the pie. But if you are really good at just a few of them and not so good at the others, you might be able to kind of counteract the negative effects, right? As we see in scientific studies where someone might be living a relatively unhealthy life, but if you can get them to be active for, say, 150 minutes a week, so about 21 minutes a day, they're just, walking briskly, Like their risk of heart attack goes down very significantly. Their risk of all-cause mortality goes down very significantly. And that's just one slice of it, right? So we think of supplements in a similar way.
Now, going forward, taking it, I mean, these are tremendous developments, tremendous advances. This is such an exciting time. I have to ask, what are you most excited about for the next 5 years? What do you think's coming down the pipeline, or what do you wish for if you could wave a magic wand?
For Novo specifically, or for longevity in general?
For the whole thing, the whole space that.
Yeah, I would say for the whole space, my hope is, and we intend to be a leading force to bring this about, is that the general public is empowered that with the knowledge, the resources to understand that aging is not this immutable force. It's not something that you have no impact on. It's actually elastic. You can stretch it in one direction or the other. And obviously, we want to stretch it in the direction of slowing down the passage of time or the effects that passage of time has on our bodies. So making people aware that it is scientifically proven, it is a fact that you can accelerate aging in animals and humans included, and you can decelerate it. And these are the things that we know as of now. The science has elucidated that these things can slow down aging and these other things can accelerate it, and empower people with this knowledge so that they can start taking aging into their own hands. And by extension, the quality of life can potentially increase, the risk of age-related diseases can decrease, and lifespans and health spans can increase as a result of people being knowledgeable about this. That's the most exciting thing for me, is knowledge is power. And it was life-changing for me when I came to realize this fact about a decade ago when reading a scientific paper called The Hallmarks of Aging. And then the second point related to that is just then making longevity as accessible and achievable for as many people as possible. It's not about that $30,000 stem cell treatment. Because that's not accessible for most of us, right? Like it's about doing something that, maybe adds up to $500 or $1,000 a year, something that if you prioritize health, you can find a way to fit that into your budget.
Yeah, that's such an important point, especially your first point. I have to admit, that was an aha moment for me, in that there's very strong evidence that how people conceptualize aging, their own mindset about aging, if they think that, 60-year-olds are old and 70-year-olds should be in a wheelchair and 80-year-olds, it's time to die, that's what will happen to
Manifest.
them. It's almost self-fulfilling. And on the other hand, the person who thinks, man, I'm 90, I want to see my great-grandchildren and I want to play with their great-grandchildren when I'm 100, those people will have a much greater chance of visualizing that and becoming that. And that the mindset, for all the wonderful stuff we're doing with testing and drugs and supplements and exercise, mindset, I think has to be one of the underappreciated power tools that we all have, and maybe even one of the most powerful tools. But
yeah, I think a fact that people are very skeptical of, and we have data to prove that they're skeptical of this, but it is a fact, is that aging is predominantly based on our lifestyles and environment, and not so much on our genetics. So you can argue what percentage, but the fact is that studies range from 75% to the more recent studies saying that 90% or more of aging is based on lifestyle and environment. And that implies less than 10% is based on our genetics. Now, people disagree with this all of the time. They'll cite examples of family members who live an unhealthy life and then still lived a long life. There's many different reasons why that may happen. But my question is, well, what if they didn't live an unhealthy life? How much longer would they have lived, right? Much longer. And so that's empowering, realizing that it is really the decisions that we're making that can ultimately add up to how long we're going to live that healthy life.
Well, Chris, how can people follow you on social media? And maybe you could tell people your website, the best way to access you and information.
Sure. So Novos is the company I founded. Novoslabs.com is the website. We're on all of the social networks as Novos Labs. And we have a fantastic blog. We have a mobile app called Novos Life that's completely free. We have different tools on our website called, like, for example, Novos PhenoAge you can search for, which is actually a biological age clock that just looks at a photograph, a selfie of you, and can tell you how old you look biologically. All completely free. And then me personally, I have slowmyage.com, and I'm on, let's see, Instagram, X, and TikTok as Slow My Age.
Well, thanks again, Chris, for spending time with us and sharing your knowledge about this. And thanks so much for all the great work you're doing.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Rob.
If you are enjoying this program, please hit that subscribe button, or even better, leave a review. Your support makes it possible for us to create the quality programming that we're continually striving for.
Can I start? Is it recording?
It's already recording.
Oh, sorry. This is for general information and educational purposes only, and it's not intended to constitute or substitute for medical advice or counseling, the practice of medicine, or the provision of healthcare, diagnosis, or treatment, or the creation of a physician-patient or clinical relationship. The use of this information is at their own user's risk. If you find this to be on the value, please hit that like button to subscribe to support the work that we do on this channel. And we take your suggestions and advice very seriously, so please let us know what you'd like to see on this channel. Thanks for watching, and we hope to see you next time. You should say that.
Yeah, that's good. It's pretty good. I think that's very good. You like it? You want to do it one more time? Is that good? I think that was good.
You need to save the recording.
Very good.